When the sun sets, the undead awaken. To slake their hunger, they feed upon the herd of unaware mortals. Right beneath our noses, the kindred clash against their rivals as they vie for control of the city of San Francisco. Are you strong enough to cheat Final Death and see another night? Vampire the Masquerade Rivals expandable card game from Renegade Game Studios.
Good evening, family. I am Matt Holland here with Matt Hyra. Matt, how are you doing tonight?
Hey, I'm doing pretty well, actually.
It's another Vampire Wednesday, and we've got some news and some thoughts about tournament play, the pressure at big events, tips, tricks, things that we've picked up over years of either developing or playing card games that may come in handy. But first, we've got some news and housekeeping stuff. We are going to be marking our tournament rules and that rules clarification document as 1.0 and locking those as final and ready for Gen Con. So tomorrow, probably I'll get those on the organized play portion of the vampirecardgame.com website. You can go on there and look and see, make sure you know what is expected of you at a tournament, make sure that you know any weird interactions or edge cases that are defined in that clarification document. Uh, those are still subject to change in the future, but this is what we're going to go with for Gen Con.
Mhm.
Speaking of Gen Con, seats are available for all of our events at Gen Con. Please do not hesitate to come and join us. There is going to be plenty of chances for you to win stuff. We have lots of prizes, and this is the chance to play when the meta's not settled, when nobody, has been playing the game for years and tons of games. This is your chance to have like a breakout success and become Prince of Indianapolis. So
Yep.
I hope I see you at Gen Con.
This
And
this
Matt,
might be this might be your best opportunity to beat the people who are going to be world champions a couple years from now. Put it that way.
well, and I've had experiences at tournaments where I show up and third round, they're like, oh yeah, that guy's the current world champion, or that's the U.S. champ, or the Polish national
Mhm.
champ. Nobody you play here will be a anything champion except for maybe our season zero, leaders. You're not going to have that
Right.
uh, intimidation factor of sitting down from somebody who is just a known monster in the game. Although you're all monsters in our hearts because you are vampires.
True.
The deck builder that we have in progress, we are planning to show that off late September and then have an open beta so you guys can go ahead and pick apart and find any weirdness or issues that I don't want to build 3,000 decks myself to test it, and I'm sure you guys want to be using a cool deck builder to make deck lists. So we're going to get the best of both worlds there and get that into your hands sooner rather than later.
Yeah, so we're sorry that it isn't out before Gen Con, but we figure with the limited card pool there is right now, it should be fairly easy to organize your cards and your thoughts. Once there's 500 different cards, it becomes a little more difficult, and a deck builder is your best friend. We're not quite there yet, so we're plugging along.
That's another thing. This is the easiest to learn card pool that you'll ever have for a major Rivals event.
It's
Just
true
the
too.
base and the first expansion. And the one last thing for Gen Con, those of you who were with us for the Elysium event where we built a
Mm-hmm.
card for Victor Temple on stream, that card is going to be available for the first time at Gen Con. So people playing in the event, I'll have them set aside for you. People who will show up at our booth to buy a Vampire Masquerade 5th edition role-playing book, you'll get one there at the booth. People playing in our role-playing sessions, you'll get one at the role-playing session. We'll have them available in a lot of different places, but Gen Con is your first chance to get that card.
What if they buy Rivals at the Renegade
Oh yeah,
store?
absolutely.
There we go. Okay,
Yeah, you buy pretty much anything
but
at the Renegade store, I'll give you one.
fair enough. However, we should say that Victor Temple will not be legal in any of the constructed events. So,
Correct. The
or
only use
any of the
case
events.
you could use them in the on-demand pods as long as everybody's okay with that.
Sure, as long as everyone has one, you can decide on your own to say, hey, you guys cool if we play with Victor? If everyone has Victor and everyone agrees, then go ahead. Yeah.
Yep.
That's
A lot
good.
of the
That's a
on-demand
good
stuff
idea.
I envision will be a group of 8 players who say, "Hey, we all have this afternoon free. Like, let's go play some Vampire." And for
Yeah.
those, you can pretty much you can do what your group wants to as long as you're in agreement.
Mhm. Yeah, you could do 4 1v1s, and
Yep.
whatever you want, or two 4-player tables with top two from each table going to a final, whatever you want. So,
Easy peasy.
mhm.
Well, our main topic for tonight is just talking about playing a game like Rivals at an event like Gen Con in a
Yeah.
large event. And we're going to give you some tips. We're just going to give you some advice, some things to think about as you're preparing for the convention. Real quick, Craig Cajun asking how long till we have a Gangrel deck. So those of you at Gen Con who go to the pre-release, you're going to have a Gangrel deck in, let me look at the calendar here. What, 3 weeks?
3 weeks,
3 weeks.
basically. Yeah.
Yeah, just over 3 weeks on Thursday. The people playing the pre-release will get a copy of The Wolf and the Rat, which includes the Gangrel and the Nosferatu. So not long. For
Which
people other than
also
that,
will not be legal except in pods if everyone
correct.
wants to do that. So,
Yep.
but I'm sure some people will just be playing it just to get the experience of it with other players from around the country, around the world. Yeah.
And for those of you who are not at Gen Con, that will be out month or two after. It very much depends on the current wild state of global shipping. So,
Yep. We will not be rushing it since Blood and Alchemy was delayed several times through no fault of our own.
it's just our
So,
good friend Murphy, because literally the truck
oh yeah.
here in the United States broke,
Yep.
and just it never ends. It's a wonderful time to be in moving large quantities of things around the world. So,
Now, Mr. Holland,
yes,
before
sir.
we get into this tournament strategy and talking about the meta and just how to prepare for events, what is the largest tournament you ever played in? Obviously it wasn't for Rivals because there hasn't been one, but
Largest tournament that I have played in was somewhere between 200 and 300 people for X-Wing. So
for
that's
X-Wing,
at
wow,
Gen Con, North
that's great.
American North American Continental Championships back in 2015 or so. So pretty big.
Cool, cool.
What about you?
Personally, yeah, I've
Big Magic stuff or in the past?
yeah, I played in four Magic Pro Tour events in the first year, in the 96, 97 range. So old school. um, so yeah, biggest event for me, probably, yeah, a couple hundred people. Yep.
I have
And
I
I've
have
judged also events that have been almost 200, maybe not. Not, I wasn't the head judge. I've head judged maybe 164 around there, but
okay.
yeah.
So a lot of experience there. I have on the
Mhm.
organized play side of things been involved with events up to 500 people. Did not actually have to run those myself or judge them. I did more logistic things for that, but we've been around a lot of big events and seen a lot of people competing at high levels. And so these are some takeaways and just some things to think about, because I think for some people this may be their first card game because they're really into Vampire, and this jumped out as a way to have that both multiplayer or one-on-one. You may be coming from other Vampire games, you may be coming from other card games. So I think the player base for Rivals really does run the gamut. So hopefully even the most experienced players will get something out of this that they find
Sure.
helpful. And for those of you who are a little bit newer to competitive gaming, hopefully there's a lot of good information for you guys.
Yeah, and for people who have not played in a tournament before, this tournament is not going to be over 100 people. Gen Con is going to be reduced capacity this year.
Yeah.
We're running our event in kind of the prime time, Friday, Saturday. We realize some people who might have wanted to play in our game are going to be sucked over into True Dungeon with their buddies because they do it every year. So yep, we know some of the better players may not show up until the pods, which is totally fine. It's great, but if you're a brand new tournament player, don't be afraid to come out. Everyone is at the same level. No one is a rules expert yet, except for hopefully me and Mr. Holland. So, yeah.
And the 4 judges.
And the other judges. Yeah, there will be more judges. So, yeah, anytime you have a question, we're already getting into other topics. So let's go through let's start at the beginning.
Yeah,
You need a deck. Let's
you
talk.
need a
We're going to
deck.
talk about the Prince of the City because that's the main event. That's the one that's really going
Yes.
to establish the meta for the next 6 months. So that's what people really want to talk about or
Yep.
want to
And really,
think
all
about.
this, all the advice that's geared at the Prince of the City is going to be applicable to your lower level of competition too.
Mhm.
It's maybe just not quite as important if you're playing, casually or just trying out a new thing in the pre-release. But the principles all still maintain. So, Matt, when you're trying to pick a deck,
Mhm.
as a player, what's kind of the first step for you?
Yeah, deciding on a deck when you're going to a constructed event is your first step, and that's where you need to figure out what you think is fun and effective. And you want to play a deck that fits your style. Okay. If you're a person who uh, likes to math things out and such and look for little corners of the game where you can make profit, let's call profit agenda,
Sure.
then an aggro deck may not be your style here. If you're someone who's kind of loud, a little brash, a little risky, then maybe an aggressive deck is good for you.
Yep.
If you're someone who likes to kind of hold back and spring all of your trouble on your opponents late in the game where you can just like keep everyone down and then you come over the top, maybe conspiracies or schemes are for you. So in a tournament setting, you're going to be your mind is going to be engaged the whole time. People are nervous sometimes when they play tournaments. We're going to make it as easy as possible for people coming in. There's going to be judges. If you ever have a question, you can raise your hand. Even when it's not your turn, you can just say, "Hey, on my next turn, I was planning on doing this. Is that legal? Or how can I do that with this character, or do I need this, or can these
Yep.
guys work together?" Like we can answer these questions for you.
Especially in this
So
first event, don't be
yeah,
afraid to ask questions. There will
yep,
be I think in almost every game played at Gen Con, there's going to be a question that someone needs to ask because they have not played
yep,
enough, and
yep,
nobody at that table may have played enough to encounter that
right,
edge case. So
and
more
yeah.
so than any other time, this is going to be the time to get those questions out and not stress
Mhm.
about the fact that you don't know everything.
Yep.
I think your advice about the style is really huge, and especially with the clans in Rivals,
Mhm.
that's so important to play the clan that speaks to you and that is enjoyable to play. We don't really have the temptation that you sometimes get in games where you hear that X deck is winning all the tournaments. Well, I want to play X
Right.
deck, but it may not be a good fit for you personally, and
Mhm.
that can cause your performance to suffer. We don't have to worry about that so much, but you may see on Discord or on Facebook somebody saying that, oh, Bruja is just so strong. But if you don't enjoy playing Bruja, that's not going to be a fun day for you. And in anything like this, we're there to have fun. We're there to compete, but you don't want to be miserable the whole time, and
Mhm.
your performance won't be as good as if you are playing something that you're very comfortable piloting. So don't get
Yeah.
sucked into the sort of the hype.
Yeah. For general, for general deciding on a deck, normally we're talking about Prince of the City, so that's going to be a 4-player game. Um, so we're just going to be talking tonight about 4-player. One versus one is also going to be at the event. There's going to be
Yep.
some 1v1, and certainly the 8-man pods can do that. 1v1 has other considerations that you want to go through, like how important are specific vampires to my strategy, and 1v1 tends to be a little more aggressive because there aren't other players at the table to slow an aggressive deck down. But for 4-player, there's anything is possible. Anything can happen. An aggressive deck probably can't just wreck the entire table. Can't beat. May not be able to beat down by turn 3 that they could in a 1v1 game, right? Because there's
Yep.
other people might have something to say about that.
Yes.
So,
Yes. And
mhm,
the other two players at the table are not going to let you just snipe your rival
right.
immediately without becoming involved in that. And that's the
Yeah,
part of the beauty of the multiplayer play that we're going to be offering. I
indeed.
think a big thing with multiplayer though is the leaders. With the fact that
Hmm.
you could show up at a table where everybody is expecting to run Bruno as their leader. You need to show up at Gen Con with a backup plan and perhaps even a backup plan for your backup plan. You need to have a deck
Uh,
that could run off of someone other than your initial leader because it could very likely become necessary. So I
yeah,
think it's just important to have a game plan for that. So the first time it happens, you're not just sitting there like, well, what the heck do I do? Like, my whole deck
yeah.
is built around having the governor, and I don't have him.
Yeah, if your deck is Hydra and 6 Thin Bloods, and suddenly 2 other people at the table all have Hydra, you better have a good secondary leader there, like maybe Jacob Frost or something. Just think about that. Um, Also, because of card clan requirements, keep in mind you might, if for instance, if that was your deck, Hydra plus 6 Thin Bloods, you have to get Hydra, or all of your Bruja
Bruja cards
cards
are
in the
dead.
deck are going to be dead, unless the miracle happens and Hydra goes into torpor, and then you can play your own. But that's a long shot. So
Yes. And the other thing too is if you have an important vampire for your strategy, I would have an amount of prestige in mind that
mhm,
that you've decided is worth paying for you to use that initial leader.
yeah,
And stick to that, like make up your mind, figure out what that number is, and then stick to that. Don't overpay and put yourself at a disadvantage because you think, oh well, I can just play two more prestige and have that. It's better to have a well thought out plan and stick to that plan than to just wing it
yeah.
in most cases.
Yeah, in the case, and the number of, let's just use Hydra as the example. Let's just say there are 3 players who all flip Hydra. If you're player 1, you're the first person to have to bid. You only get 1 bid. It is probably a very good idea to just bid 1 prestige. You will end up paying 7 for him, but you're most likely going to shut out the other 2 Hydras at the table, because paying 2 extra is a lot. And if your bid of 1 makes somebody else bid 2, you don't feel bad about that, because you now have an advantage over that player, even though you're not going to have Hydra. Hopefully you've got someone in mind who can do
Yep.
that kind of heavy lifting for your team. But yeah, that it's a consideration if you're playing if your group figures out that oh, this is the guy. Well, keep in mind other people from other cities and states might also think this is the guy. So
You also might end up paired with your group at round 3 and
that's true. That's
and
true.
run into that. It's
Yep.
this aspect of the game is a thing that I think even people coming from other competitive card games aren't going to have experienced a lot because it's not a thing that is super common. So
Mhm.
I think it's important to have a plan, have a backup plan, and know what is worth doing in order to keep that card.
Yeah.
Just think it out in advance.
Yeah, and I should say that the leader bids tend to be in the 1 to 2, 0 to 2 range, really. Some people don't want to pay anymore, and that's certainly reasonable. You do not have to bid extra. You can just say, well, it's not that important for me. In fact, now that I know that you're going to have Hydra, I'm going to take someone who can beat up on Hydra.
Yes.
That's the good thing. Sometimes that's the silver lining to losing your first choice leader, is now you get to choose a leader and you
and
know who
and
their
that's an
leader is.
interesting strategy. So if you're backup, so Hydra, what's his attributes? You
He's
probably know off the
a
top of your
he's a
head.
210, 2
So two
physical,
one
1
zero. So
social, 0 mental.
if you bring Hydra as your primary and you bring a backup that is strong in the mental attribute, when you
Yeah,
lose and you are not able to run Hydra because somebody else is, your backup is actually a good counter to Hydra and that they are able to attack him effectively. So there's a layer of strategy there possible where you have a backup that is kind of, I don't know, counter to your primary. So if you're not able to use the primary, you know that you have the tools to, affect,
yeah,
your opponent's leader. So kind of just a thing to think about that is not familiar to a lot of players. So I think it's
Hmm.
worth pointing out. Think about deck testing. I know, like with COVID going on, with play groups kind of getting started and stores starting to run the game, you may not be able to sit down and play, you know, 30 or 40 or whatever number of games against different players to test your deck out against a ton of different um, scenarios and opponents. An easy thing to do is make that deck, shuffle it up, draw an opening hand, and then just war game out your first 2 rounds. What are you going to do with these starting cards to advance your win condition and to set yourself up for success? Uh, I think if you do that and you're consistently drawing things that you don't want, that you're saying, oh, like this is not good, consider cutting down how many of those cards are in your deck or taking them out completely. Because with no mulligan in here, you want to have the tools that you need then in that first round, and you want to know how you're going to apply those tools. And that's the thing you can do solo. You don't have to have an opponent to do that.
Right. Yeah, and doing those draws, you're also going to determine quickly if there's any cards in your deck that you really don't want 3 of,
Yep.
right? Like there's a if you're playing a Toreador deck that wants lots of retainers, the gang up card can do +1 damage for each retainer in the party. It's just not going to do you a lot of good during the first 3 or 4 rounds of the game, because you're not going to have enough retainers to make it the devastating attack that it should be. So is that a card that you only want 2 of? That's where you're gonna learn a little bit just about how these cards end up in your hand and how useful they are at different points in the game.
Absolutely. Another thing that we talked about a couple times over different streams, but I think is worth pointing out again, because we may have people who just haven't played a lot of card games competitively. Your library can be from 40 to 60 cards. The conventional wisdom is that it is always better to be at the minimum rather than the maximum. It is a little unintuitive for people who haven't played card games a lot, because and I was guilty of this when I started playing card games, thinking, oh, well, 60 is better. I have way more options. I can bring a bigger toolbox. That's all great. Until you realize that adding 20 more cards reduces the likelihood of you drawing any given important card uh, correspondingly.
Yeah.
And that's what you want. You want to have 40 cards that are the cards you need, not well, it'd be nice to have. It's like if I'm going backpacking, I don't want to bring all the things that might be really cool if I happen to end up in this weird situation that's not likely. I want to
Right.
bring, a tent, a stove, sleeping bag, and the things I'm going to want to have access to them at all times.
Yeah. You might think that, oh my gosh, I need to put an answer to everything in my deck. Like I need the sheriff to take out ongoings, and I need the royal retreat to get rid of SAD out of the middle, and all that. You don't need. There's 4 people at the table. You don't need to have everything in your deck. So if you find that you are putting things in your deck just so that you can interact with that particular thing, that there might be other ways to do it. Like if you can knock out a key vampire in someone's coterie, they may not be able to do as well with their conspiracies, or as well with any healing that they want to do, things like that. So
Yep.
you don't have to have a card for every occasion. And the worst thing about having a card for every occasion is you're always going to draw them when you don't need them.
I think, and it's important to note this advice about the 40 card thing, that this is competitively geared advice. If you
Mhm.
are showing up because you want to you don't particularly care about winning, you just want to have a really good time, go nuts. Include the kitchen sink and
Sure.
do that. We are trying to gear our advice towards people who want to be competitive. Um,
Mhm.
don't feel like that is the only thing to do. But tying into the deck size thing and not having an answer for everything, Matt, you have a thing down here. Know what decks your deck is going to struggle with. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that's applicable here?
Yeah. So that is if you're playing, well, let's talk about some of the different deck types that are out there. There's aggro decks that are looking to get a KO. There's scheme decks and conspiracy decks that are looking to kind of control things a little and spring surprises on your foes. There's going to be some, I guess maybe a Tremere ritual deck, things like that. So every deck is going to have something that it's not going to be great at. Usually aggro decks are pretty bad at stopping schemes, okay?
Sure.
So just keep in mind that, an aggro deck probably has a ton of attack cards.
Yep.
Probably not so many reaction cards, and it might have a little bit of ways to get your opponents out of their haven and things like that, like a smoke them out or a far reach if you're playing with Blood and Alchemy. So just consider that your deck will have trouble with some other kinds of decks. But if you can make some key attacks, knock out some key characters, you can kind of diminish the issues your deck has through good old-fashioned smash mouth than having to come up with some solution with some crazy combo of cards in your hand.
Well, and I think another way to look at it too, like say your aggro deck, if you're just going pure attacking, you could struggle against a deck that just forts up and scores their points and never leaves their haven. So a card like Smoke 'em Out is a good tech inclusion to force those decks to come out and play, and prevent you from having to just burn cards on intel every single time you want to make attacks. In other cases, if you're playing a deck that does not have a good influence game, but you want to be able to stop opponent schemes when it's a do or die type thing, they're the influence modifier cards. You might include 2 copies of an influence modifier as a thing that doesn't quite band-aid the weak spot of your deck, but it does let you at a critical time maybe exert more pressure in that arena than you normally would be able to. And I think that's worth looking at, and also just knowing, hey, I have trouble with this sort of build, and knowing that you're going to have an uphill fight lets you consider things a little bit differently when you're playing that game, and will help you. So just knowing your strengths and weaknesses, important to figure out.
Yeah, you might be playing an aggro deck or a ritual deck or a thin blood recruit 'em up deck, and when you're done putting everything in your deck that you really wanted, you might have a slot or two. You might be at 38 cards and say, well, I got room for 2 more things. You could put in a couple of influence modifiers because, at worst, you can just discard them for intel or mending. And at best, someone is going to assume that you do not have any influence, and they might underbid, under exert influence on a particular scheme, like a greed or a fame and fortune. And you can pull a rabbit out of a hat and go, bam! I've got 6 influence against that, and that could be devastating to someone as well. So, yeah, just keep in mind that any deck is capable of anything at a certain point. You just have to figure out where you want to fight your battles.
Yep. And I think the last thing we'll talk about with deck selection and strategy here is to have a backup plan. And Matt, you added this, and I think it's a very good call out.
Yeah.
Your example of if your deck is counting on getting titles into play, know that you may encounter another deck that's putting those titles into play. You can't count on getting all of those points. So having another way to score is important.
Yep. So, for instance, if you see there's another title deck or 2 at the table with base, three people with base of power, or seemingly, you won't know. Keep in mind, let's talk about that. You won't know what the other players are running for their agenda. You might on round 1, you probably will on round 2, and by round 3, if they haven't flipped it, you can probably assume what they have. But for instance, if their agenda is playthings and they run out in the street and grab a retainer, they're going to flip their agenda immediately.
Yep.
If someone has got a conspiracy agenda, they may not they may not flip that thing face up until they're ready to do a conspiracy on round 3, right?
Yep.
So things like that. You'll have some idea based on their leader, some idea based on their haven, but you won't really know until they flip it up, and that can be done at any time for any reason. No timing issues involved. You can, yeah.
So ideally, your backup plan is something that you can put into play
Mhm.
on turn 2 or 3 that does not require you to pick a leader, a different leader, or so to speak, because you probably won't have that information before the game starts.
Yeah,
So you just want to make sure you have some other avenues to score points besides your primary thing that you count on.
yeah.
That's going to
So yeah,
solve a
so
lot of problems.
if you are competing for titles with other players, it's going to be a little bit of timing and a little bit of who can just get the draws quicker, right? You want to get the titles that have not seen play yet into your hand faster than your opponents so that you can get that title into play.
Yep.
So if you're a title deck and the titles in your hand are already in play, you either need to be knocking out those characters so that you can then play the title and it removes from them, or you can just try to take maybe your first action is a draw. Maybe you'll draw into a title that they don't have out, and then for your second action you can play it. So drawing cards is not a bad thing.
Or using something like search engine to cycle your deck and get to titles that haven't been played.
Yep.
Stuff like that is all ways to work around that, but it's
Yep.
worth having some options, because you'll also end up in situations where you're only 2 agenda from winning, but you've got all your titles out. Okay, what do you do for this? You need to have
Yeah.
another way to score points, and that's going to serve both purposes.
Yeah, in general, the way I like to say is you can count on your agenda card for maybe, somewhere around 6. You can probably count on it for about 6 agenda. How are you going to get the rest?
Yep.
An aggressive deck can knock out some characters, and you might get a good amount of agenda early, but maybe you're not quite knocking them out yet. You can go after some SAD or some citizens, which will, and then add them on as retainers, and hopefully those abilities on the retainers will help you when people come out to try to take you down in the street.
Indeed.
Mhm.
So let's go on to the morning of the event. You wake up in Indianapolis. It's Friday morning. You've had a long day of buying cool stuff and playing on Thursday. Went out for some drinks. It's time to show up and get going. Make sure that you have everything. It seems obvious, but I think every tournament I've been to, we have run into people who forgot cards or forgot tokens or dice or something important, and that is not a good way to start your tournament, running around frantically to find someone who can loan you the cards you need.
Yeah.
That's
Bring your whole rivals box. That's just a good plan.
especially
Right?
with right now with the fact that the card pool is not too large to carry around efficiently.
Mhm.
Not a bad idea. Bring extras of tokens. Don't just bring. Don't decide you're going to be red all day. That's
Yeah.
not going to work. You need to bring multiple colors. You need to bring full sets of everything and have that ready to go. I would also, anybody who's coming to play organized play events, bring an extra deck box for your prizes. You're going to get some pretty cool plastic cards, some pretty nice full art
Sweet.
paper cards, and you don't want to just shove those into your pocket or at the bottom of your backpack. You want to keep those protected and nice so that you can use them. So make sure you have a spot to stash those prizes. And of course, bring sleeves. Bring extra sleeves. Make sure you've
Extra.
got your library and your crypt that are sleeved different colors. Opaque sleeves across the board. And yeah, bring some extras in case the sleeve splits, in case there's some kind of damage that is marking the card. Just another easy thing to do that will save you headaches and
Yeah.
save you stress that you do not want to deal with.
This includes extra sleeves for the city deck as well, because everyone does need to bring a city deck, even though you'll only be playing with one at a time. But just bring some extra sleeves for everything.
Yep.
Yep.
And then, make sure in the morning, get there on time, or even better, get there early. Make sure you have a good breakfast. Make sure you drink some water. Make sure that you give yourself all the tools that you need to perform at a high level throughout the day.
Yeah, and make sure you got some sleep last night. Let's say we know it's a convention, we know it's exciting. Let's say minimum 6 hours, 8 hours preferred. Okay.
There's definitely I've seen it happen where someone who is a favorite to do well in a tournament was visibly not well rested, and it can affect them. So if you want to take it seriously, just take it a little bit easier than you might otherwise.
Yep.
But bring snacks, bring
Yeah.
water,
Bring snacks, water.
make sure you're ready to go. We will have a meal break, assuming things go on time and we're not hilariously, hilariously behind, which has happened at Gen Con events. I know people, you know, our good friend Murphy likes to show up.
Ah,
But otherwise, be ready to, snack in between games. Just keep your fuel up, keep your energy level going.
yeah. And
And
when you show up to the tournament area, check in. Okay. Have your
yes.
deck list already filled out. Use pencil in case you want to make any last minute adjustments, but
See,
have
I
your
would
deck
say the
list
other
all
way.
ready to go.
I would say pre-type it, print it out, and then you're not tempted to meddle up until the last minute.
Well, everyone's gonna make changes at the last second. It happens every time, right? Yeah,
It's like there's two kinds of people.
right.
And when we kind of touched on this before, but don't be intimidated at these big events that I've played at places like Gen Con. Are places that I have met people who I have had really fulfilling friendships with all over the world. I've got a great friend in Kuwait who I met through playing big tournaments. I've got friends in Europe. I've
Nice.
got friends in Australia, and you meet people at these events that are excited about the same thing that you are. Everybody is still learning. Like, this is going to be a great place to get involved in the community and meet people. So don't be
Mhm.
intimidated by the fact that it is a major organized play event. It is, but this is going to be the best and most sort of welcoming and friendly major organized play event that you're ever going to play in.
Yeah, and the promo cards and prize cards that you collect just by playing are going to be the least distributed during the month of September, right? Like the least number of people that could get these cards are going to have them because of the reduced size of Gen Con. Gen Con in the future, there's going to be a couple hundred people getting these cards. This year, maybe 100 people will be getting these cards. So you will be the person going back
Yep.
to your home store, to your home group with the best stuff that no one else has yet, but they'll be able to get it in a few months. So
And that's even if you lose every single game,
that's
you're
right.
going to have some cool stuff that no one else,
Mm-hmm.
in your group
Yeah.
or in your town is going to have.
Yep.
So absolutely. We have a couple other tips here. So a thing that I have had good success with, and I think I can't recommend it highly enough. If you have a great game with somebody and you guys enjoyed, you had really good banter, just had a good time, swap information because there's those pods happening throughout Gen Con. You may
Mm-hmm.
want to get them and some of your friends together and some of their friends and play on demand. And that way you have a nice play group of people that you're comfortable with, that you want to play more with and get to know better. So don't be
Yeah.
shy about saying like, hey, do you want to play a pod after this? Do you want to, team up and play some multiplayer later on? Even if it's casual stuff, Gen Con is a place where you can do that and make new friends and just meet people. I feel it
Mm-hmm.
feels kind of silly sometimes, like telling a bunch of adults, like, hey, it's okay. You can go and have fun and make friends. I feel like I'm talking to my 3-year-old who's going to be going to preschool, but it's true. Gen Con's great for that. And if you don't tell the other person, like, hey, I had a really good game, like, do you want to play again? You're not going to make those connections. So don't be shy. Matt, you had a couple things sort of along those lines in terms of housekeeping and sort of keeping track of stuff too.
Yeah, yeah. So, to follow with Mr. Holland, if you do like the people you played, yeah, give him your cell phone number. Tell him to text you if they need an eighth person for a pod, because the thing you might have wanted to go to might have been canceled, or you never know, or overstuffed, or you skipped it because you wanted to go to dinner with some other people, and then suddenly during dinner they're like, hey, we're going to run an 8-person pod at 9 p.m. You want in? Like, that's the dream. Like, I would love that if I went to the convention. You know, the added benefit of having a cell phone nearby is you'll be able to keep track of what time it is. Okay. Now, you're going to want to, because we're going to tell you roughly when the rounds are going to start.
Yep.
And we won't, for instance, let's say that, like, one thing we haven't mentioned, let's go ahead and mention that now. Some of you were here for the tournament rules cast that we did a few weeks back, where we mentioned the 2-player games are 30-minute rounds, 3-player games are 50, and 4-player is 75. We have increased that because across the board, 2-player is now 35, 3-player is now 60, and 4-player is now 90 minutes. Keep this in mind during your testing, but this should be sufficient time. We realized that those numbers had been based on a lot of play testing. Our play testers are very experienced, and we have realized that not only are the players brand new and may have never played in a 4-player game, the judges are also new, and just the whole format is new. So we just wanted to add some extra time. Now, let's say that everyone is done. Let's say every game finishes by minute 65. We're not going to start the next round until the posted time, essentially, right? So if we say, if round 1 is 11 a.m., round 2 is not going to be before 12:30 at minimum, right? Because that's 90 minutes later.
So essentially, if your game finishes early, you can know what time the earliest the next game might start, and go out to the food trucks, go get some snacks, go get some fresh air, and don't need to stress about us starting without you because everybody finished.
We won't start early, but we will start on time. So set an alarm for like 5 minutes before the next round. When that alarm goes off, even if you're in the dealer's room, hightail it back over to the tournament area.
Indeed.
Yep.
Another thing, we're talking about the connection with people, as Tobin mentions in the chat. Do get permission. Just say, hey, like, do you mind if I friend you on Facebook, or just make sure that you are being transparent, and that your interest in playing with that person is reciprocated, so that nobody is made to be uncomfortable or feel like like they are not safe or welcome. So just little housekeeping there.
Yeah, that's a good thing. If we know if you're like live streaming the event, you're going to want to keep the camera on yourself unless everyone at the table agrees. If you're taking pictures for Facebook or Instagram, ask permission. It's okay to take pictures of some of the table. It's the people that you want to be respectful of.
Yep, absolutely.
Somebody might, have like, wow, they've got like 7 vampires and 8 ongoings in play, and you're super impressed. Yeah, you can take a picture of the table. That's
another little housekeeping thing. Keep track of your components. We said bring extra stuff, but don't just display your whole collection out on the table for every game. You want to make sure your deck is in its own deck box and is separate from your extra cards, or the cards that you decided last night to not include in the deck. You want to make sure that the other colors of tokens you're not using are put away. You don't want to end up in a situation where you're trying to figure out which of your 4 opponents that day have the card or the token that you are missing. Make sure you know what is yours, and when you're done with the game, when you leave that table, that you have all of your components, all of your supplies, all of your personal belongings, so that you don't have a situation later that's going to affect your games.
Mm-hmm.
And then Matt, you had a thing in here about asking, after you finish, if you have some time there before the next round, talking to your opponent and about what they feared from your deck and what.
During the game is a good chance for some banter and taunting, and some good vampiric, lore exchanging. But at the end of the game, it can be just as important to talk to the people and just say, maybe your deck didn't quite come together, and but you don't really know where it all fell apart. Ask some of the people at the table, hey man, what were you expecting out of my deck? Was there anything that you were really fearing out of my deck, right? And this could be the person that you call rival, or the guy who was coming after you. So that can be valuable information, which most people will be happy to give because the game's already done. And they might tell you something like, oh wow, I was really fearing that you were going to do X. Maybe it was a particularly deadly attack, or some scheme that was going to be out of left field, or just shooting, or just sending a conspiracy there, a negative
Yep.
conspiracy their way. What were you fearing from my deck? What did you think was going to happen when I had those characters in play? And usually people will tell you, and that might be something that you may not have those items in your deck, but
And you may have, you just didn't
you
think to
may.
use them in that particular way. But
Yeah.
yeah, it could either be helpful in a future game, that tournament, or it just could be something for the next event you play in if you make some changes.
Yeah. And this even goes back, I mean, this is super high level, but let's go way back to deck building, where we're wondering, do I need everything to be a 3 of? Keep in mind, because 3 of is actually on the lower side for a lot of expandable and tradable card games. A lot of games are 4 of, things like that. People will expect that you have 3 of a kind in your deck, okay? But if you have a bunch of cards that are all 1 ofs, and maybe you discard one of them early on for a mending or for a secrecy or something, they're going to think that there's 2 more copies of that in your deck.
Yeah,
Okay.
it can kind of function as a paper
Yeah.
tiger or a fleeted being, where they have to
Right.
play around the fact that you might have 2 more of those.
You might have 2 more. Yeah. So if you want to unnerve your opponents, do that. But if you want to find out what really unnerved your opponents, ask them, and more likely than not, they will tell you.
Indeed.
Mhm.
So that covers a whole bunch of different things to think about. A lot of them specific to Vampire Rivals, some of them just general competitive things. I am, like I've said a bunch of times, I'm super excited to see this game played in person and to see, what is really good, what people think is really good.
Mhm.
There's just so much that I am excited to see at this event. So I'm really looking forward to it. And like Matt and I have said, come join us. If you're at Gen Con, don't be intimidated by the idea of playing in a tournament like this. It's
Mhm.
not going to be this, cutthroat, if you don't know the rules, get out of here type thing. Coyote
Two
is
more.
asking about.
Let me
Oh
do
yeah,
2 things before I forget about it. 2 things that I was kind of thinking about that we didn't mention. One is when we were talking about leaders and maybe you have to bid for your leader. Think about, keep in mind, you do not have to use the same leader every round. You might not want, if Bruno is the hotness for the event, you may not want to have any issue with that. So you might want to go with Stevie or Randolph for your leader. So, and that's totally fine to change your leader, for the next game, for the next round. Okay, you don't have to stick with the same leader the whole time. The other thing, I forgot to mention this during, we were talking about 1v1 versus 4-player. Some people haven't played 4-player yet, and they might be used to the Prince of the City coming out and being like very a very sweet grab in a 1v1 game. Keep in mind, in a 4-player game, you are possibly subject to 3 attacks against your claimant, and one of those attacks will be from the person calling you rival, and they'll get to use an attack card, which is going to be doubly bad. So keep in mind that the Prince of the City is a completely different animal in 4-player. In 1v1, Prince of the City can be pretty strong grab, because you only got one opponent, but in 4-player, look out.
Yeah, and that's why we have that change for 1v1.
Yeah.
That if it comes out in that initial draw, it gets shuffled back in. Because
Yep.
with only one person hitting you, it's much less risky to just grab first
Mhm.
turn and put the pressure on immediately.
Yep.
If you do that when you've got a Brujah player and some other players with some decent attacking, that could be a very, very short game of Rivals for you. So very good
Right.
call out from Hyra.
But here's the pro tip of the day, though. Let's say that everyone else is at 6, 7, or 8 agenda, and you're at 2 or 3 agenda. They want, all 3 of those other players want you to have the Prince card, because they don't want anyone else to have it, and it might be too risky for them to try it. So you can grab it, and that is your ticket back into the big leagues there.
Yep. Yep. Another good point.
They probably won't attack you.
Just from the chat real quick, Coyote's asking
Yep.
about Blood and Alchemy, when it's going to be coming to the US. So if
Mhm.
you guys pre-ordered, you will know that Asia fulfillment is complete. European Union and UK, I believe it's in progress. People are getting their expansions as we speak. United States, though, we actually had the truck carrying the shipment break down physically on the highway somewhere in the Midwest. So we're a little delayed. It is, I think, currently planned for them to start fulfilling next week. So with a little bit of luck, which I mean we are due some, players in the US should have it before Gen Con. I've said this in Discord, but if you're coming to Gen Con playing in the main event and for some reason you did not get your pre-order before you left, we will take care of you. Don't worry about that.
Come
You
to
can
the
continue
booth.
to assume that you will have all the cards in Blood and Alchemy to deck build with. So
Mhm.
we're not going to let anybody get hosed by that sort of thing. Just anything moving around anywhere is quite an adventure at the moment. So keep an eye on your emails for those messages from Quartermaster Logistics, and they'll be getting them out as soon as physically possible.
Yeah.
But that, I think, is all we have for tonight, Hyra. A little preview
I think
for
so.
next week. The plan is myself and Jimmy Lee, one of our producers, are going to be playing the Tremere and Thinblood decks in person and filming them, which we will then air on
Sweet.
Wednesday night. So this will be
Great.
the first chance to see Tremere and Thinblood played for most of you, especially on one of our streams. So looking forward to playing that and sharing that with you guys
That
next
might
Wednesday.
encourage some people to change up their thinking on what they want to play for Prince of the City at Gen Con, actually.
That's why
Once
I
they
thought it
see
was
it in
perfect
action,
timing.
there's been a lot of theory crafting so far, but very few people have proxied up, I would suspect. So this will be good.
And I'm calling Thinbloods because I've been looking forward to trying
Oh,
them for a
nice.
while. So
Haha,
that's
perfect.
a little preview for next week. And then we're going to be very, very close to Gen Con. So everyone, if you have not signed up for Prince of the City, please do so. And otherwise, we will see you next week for Vampire Wednesday. And thanks so much for tuning in. Matt, thanks for taking the time out of your evening to join
No
me
problem.
to talk Vampire.
All right.
Good night,
Thanks a
everyone.
lot. Think we're good.